Going to start with this being J.C. Jackson Day, which is actually the first day that franchise tags can be applied to players. And there's really no indication which way the Patriots are going, Evan, with the franchise tag situation, with signing J.C. long-term, letting him test the market, looking for trades. It really is just very unclear. What do you think? We know how much they need a number one corner. I guess it comes down to, is JC a number one corner? Is he worth paying? Or should you try to see if you can get a haul for him? First off, we'll get to what you want to do. What are you hearing? What do you feel is happening here in regards to this situation?
Well, one of my favorite reports that gets floated out there, social media, on Twitter, is when people act like they have any clue what the Patriots are going to do in free agency on February 22nd. Okay, because the Patriots, I can tell you, I was texting with an agent earlier today who has a prominent free agent player on the Patriots, and he said we are way too early for any conversations about what Bill is going to do in free agency. The Pats are notorious for being late to the party when it comes to this sort of thing. So you hear all the chatter mostly next week at the Combine in Indy, but even still, you don't hear of Patriots chatter until right before free agency opens. And I think with this JC Jackson thing, the talk of mutual interest potentially between the two sides of reaching a contract extension, every single team in the NFL has mutual interest with their own free agents. They all want to bring their own free agents back for the most part. The question really is obviously, what is the price tag for the player? And can they find a common ground there to sign that player to an extension or sign that player to a new contract when the league year begins? Right. But to start off here, nobody has any clue whatsoever if Bill Belichick is going to back up the Brinks truck for J.C. Jackson, including J.C. Jackson and his representation currently as things stand right now.
So, okay, we'll put that aside. And I think it's fair. It's nobody knows, and that's how it goes with the Patriots. But, indications here to you would be based on their cap situation, their need at the position, their need at multiple other positions. What makes sense here?
So the way that I view it, and I do think that there is a lot of internal discussion about what do we do next, right? We had a good foundational year last year, rookie quarterback, some of the free agents that we brought in hit, some of the draft picks that we made hit. That's a good foundation, good building block, but 10 wins and a bounce out in the wild card round by double digits to Buffalo is not the end goal here. So what comes next? I think the biggest thing is that you hear is a number one wide receiver. And that's what I gave him, number one wide receiver in my mock draft. But when it comes to J.C. Jackson, the overwhelming thing that I can't get over for me personally, when I discuss should they do this or should they not do this, the Patriots are not in a position nowadays without the train moving with Tom Brady where there's just doesn't seem to be anything that could get in their way, right? They couldn't let Malcolm Butler walk. They can trade Ty Law at the end of his career. They can let Darrelle Revis sign with the Jets for a huge contract, and nothing gets in the way of their success. Letting talent, especially young talent, homegrown young talent like J.C. Jackson at 26 years old, walk out the door at this point in the rebuild really feels like putting yourself behind the eight ball in a way that you don't want to after a productive year last year. So I look at it and I say J.C. Jackson has to be on this team one way or another, either by the franchise tag or by a contract extension. Obviously, it behooves the Patriots to extend him and avoid the cap penalty of a franchise tag, $18 million.
At any cost, though, Evan? Or is there a line in this? Or is there a line in the sand number?
There's always a line. I think that when you look at a fair market deal for JC, somewhere in the $18 million per year range is what a bona fide number one corner is going for. And I don't think I don't think he's the best corner in the league. He's not top 5, but is he top 10, top 15? I mean, I don't know how many corners you're drafting at that point.
This has Asante Samuel written all over it, like in the same vein of like He was good. He was the best they had. It might not have been, he might not have been worth top of the market money, but when he left, they tanked for those 3-4 years when they didn't have
Right.
anybody back there in a revolving door of really crappy
That's how I feel
cornerbacks.
about it. Is
And
if
it's
you let
very,
him walk, then
very
Jalen
similar.
Mills and the guys behind him are just the cupboard's really bare there.
It
And
falls,
you
the
haven't
drop off is huge. Right.
substantial, and you haven't really had a ton of luck in the draft at that position early in the draft, right? Juwan Williams is obviously the poster child for that now, but the first couple rounds of the draft haven't really produced great cornerback talent for you. So it's not as simple as for the Patriots, oh, we'll just let JC Jackson walk and we'll take a corner at 21,
Right.
unless somebody like Andrew Booth Jr. or Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley falls in their lap in the draft, which I don't think is going to happen, especially based off the way the boards are shaking out now. Unless something like that happens, it's really difficult to envision a guy like Kyler Gordon or McDuffie from Washington, the two Washington DBs, or somebody like that, Kair Elam from Florida, coming in and being a number one corner instantly for the Patriots. It just doesn't – those guys just don't grade out at that type of talent level. So that's the biggest thing, is what's left if you let J.C. Jackson walk, and how good is J.C.? I know he's had his problems with Stephon Diggs. I think that's a fair criticism of his game right now, is he's not a lockdown corner against a guy like Diggs in particular. But in a man coverage heavy scheme, and a scheme that wants to be a little bit versatile, that wants to play some zone, his ability to produce on the ball, turnovers, pass breakups, low completion rate in his coverage is as good statistically as any player at that position in the entire NFL.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I believe, and I know when you're talking about cornerbacks, I believe McShay's latest had Gordon, right?
Yeah.
To the Patriots, you think that that's a reach there? He's not one of the elite guys?
A little bit of a reach to me, because what I look at, and this is when we get into the mock draft, we can discuss this further, is at 21, I do really feel like you should be able to get a day one instant impact player, right? That's somebody that you are going to draft and you're going to put in your lineup in week one and have a great player at that spot. I'm not sure if a guy like Kyler Gordon is so pro ready and so smooth and so smooth in terms of the transition from the college to the NFL game that he would just be like day one starter stud, right? I just have a tough time getting there. With JC, a lot of corners struggle against guys like Diggs. A lot of corners struggle against the top guys, but you have that ability every single week to put his name up on the board opposite the other number one wide receiver on the opponent and say, JC is shadowing Diggs this week. JC is shadowing so-and-so that week. That is in this system. That's when they've had the most success, whether it's Ty Law or Revis or Asante Samuel for a couple years or Malcolm Butler or JC Jackson.
Yeah.
As long as they have somebody that can hold that down, that's when they've been at their best.
So there are a lot of bet on themselves guys, and so someone like J.C. Jackson, were he to get franchise tagged here, could theoretically say, I'm betting on myself to put up number one numbers again. And you know what? He kind of did it back-to-back seasons, and this year was one where, had he not had the season that he had, you'd be having a different conversation over his value right now. So he's done it, but he'd have to do it again. And so someone who comes in with the pedigree of an undrafted free agent, do you think there's a chance he looks at this and says, I know the target is Jalen, Ramsey's 20, and I know I'd be happy with 18, but man, bird in the hand right here. Would I take 15 and 40 guaranteed right now? 15 per 40 guaranteed, over 4 years. 38, whatever that number would be, and just be happy? Like, do you think they can get there? Because there is talk, at least, of mutual interest. Of course, that interest only goes as far as whatever number you put forth. Right. And if that number is low in the 12, 13 range, that's going to be something that's going to be hard for him to swallow. But if you're kind of getting closer to the 15, 5, 16 range, is that something both sides can live with?
I think there's a bridge to gap here, right? I think there's a way to bridge this gap with the Patriots and JC, because if you look at Bill Belichick's history of spending and free agency,
Right.
even this past year, the one thing that I think is really critical about the way that he spends money when he does shell out that big contract is it's usually for somebody that's entering the prime of their career. He doesn't back up the Brinks truck for 30-year-old players, right? He gives big contracts out to 26-year-old players, to guys that are hitting their second contracts, guys that they feel like are ascending and the arrow is pointing upwards on their career. I still think the best football for J.C. Jackson is in front of him. I think he's improved every single year that he's been in the league and is going to continue to improve on his game as he hones in on study habits, things like that against these top flight wide receivers and starts to lock them down even more consistently. So the age range that J.C. Jackson is going to be paid for by the Patriots, his age 26 through 29 season, let's call it, is exactly where Bill Belichick typically is willing to pay market value for premium talent. This is exactly at the point of the career when they paid Stephon Gilmore, right? It's the exact same age in terms of when they stretched that out with Gilmore. So I actually think you can look at Gilmore's statistics in Buffalo for his rookie contract versus JC's with the Patriots, and JC was the better player going into the contract year than Gilmore was with the Bills. So this is the time to pay a guy like this.
Explain to me Gilmore. Explain to me this entire situation, which is one I just simply don't understand. Like, okay, if you knew, just going back, because I'm trying to figure out, and again, this kind of factors into the whole, is there a plan, or is Bill just accepting whatever happens and then just dealing with that in the moment? Like the plan, sure, now I have a plan because this happened. But like, for example, Stephon Gilmore, I don't see him getting more than 13, 14 per year in free agency over a couple of years now. Would that not have been better for the Patriots to do versus having to risk losing JC in a bidding war or having to pay him up to 18, 19 million on a gamble for a guy you may or may not be certain is number one? Would not even a reduced Gilmore for 2 more years at 25 million, whatever it would have taken to extend him and keep him happy, have him play last year, bring him back, still have the option to franchise and tag JC this year if you wanted to, have been a better long-term plan?
So Gilmore wanted $16 million per year. The deal that he
but
was
he's not
looking at,
that's fair, but he's not going to get it, and he's not going to get it in free agency.
But I don't know if you can. The
he
player
might not have. He might not have.
Wanted, right.
Yeah,
so the Patriots, I think, would have done that deal at $13 million, $12 million, which might be what Gilmore ends up at in free agency this year. But he was looking at that Darius Slay contract with Philadelphia.
Yes,
and
right.
$16 million is the number I want to get to. I think I'm worth that. Patriots didn't feel like he was worth it. And again, what I come back to is maybe on a short-term deal, maybe on a 2 or 3 year deal. That's
even
really
if it wasn't, even if you meet his number, it still is good business because you have a good problem of having two guys and being able to decide what you want to do here. You've got the asset. Now you've lost all leverage. So even if it was a slight overpay, I still don't understand that move.
I think the biggest thing is what I just said a few minutes ago, which is that they don't want to pay guys that are arrow pointed downward.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
They don't want to put big money and big cap number investment into players that are declining. They want to play guys that are either hitting their peaks right when they pay them or ascending players into their primes of their careers. That's why you get guys like Matthew Judon, who they felt was hitting his peak and was going to peak right then and there for them last year. That's why you get a contract like Jonnu Smith, who hasn't worked out, but they felt like Jonnu was an ascending player, that he was going to continue to get better and outproduce what he produced in Tennessee. Didn't nail that one. J.C. Jackson, I think that's a similar conversation with more like Matthew Judon, right? Where you feel like this guy's going to be an all-pro corner for us for the next 2 years if we pay him this money.
If they believe it, it's worth whatever. Because honestly, if he plays like a number one corner for 3 years or 4 years, whatever he makes this year will be a bargain in 2 years. It doesn't even matter. So yes, that if they believe he's a number one, it's not even a conversation. You sign him up. But if they don't, if they believe they're paying number one prices for a 1A kind of more of a complimentary corner, then that's a different story altogether.
It's the Malcolm Butler conversation, right?
Yes. And so the flip side becomes, if you're the Patriots, so the Patriots have proven they will pay for people they consider to be top talent. They did it for
Right.
Mayo when he came up. They did it for Mankins. They've done it. They paid Gronk top of market. If they believe in Tom Brady at one point in his life was a top of market, they pay top of market for the people they believe deserve it. And Mason, whatever that is. There's plenty of examples. So if they believe it, there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't pay JC, because they'll pay for that. They'll pay for premium talent, especially if they have it and they feel good about it. If they don't, if they believe he's a number two in the wrapping of a number one with all of these stats,
Right.
but someone else believes he's a number one, then you have to start thinking about, yes, it might hurt us this year, but the haul I can get for this might be something I can't pass up. So I'll ask you, what's good enough, recognizing that it's going to make you worse tomorrow? What's too good to pass up if you were to get it in terms of draft capital for JC?
The tough part is that you're trading him on the tag, right? You would have to franchise
tag him and trade him,
and then trade him. The other thing that you have to look into that is that JC Jackson's going to want an extension with the team that's acquiring him. So the team is
presumably that would happen. Yeah,
and giving him money. It's a double entendre there, right? Yeah. It's a tough one. I think that JC Jackson's worth the top 50 pick. I don't think that it's worth I don't know if it's worth the first rounder when you have the fact that you have to pay him and you have to give up the capital. My guess is that you would be looking at a similar trade to what they got back for Jimmy G, right? Like the 40th pick in the draft or the 35th pick in the draft or something along those lines. I'd rather the player. It's obviously a nice consolation prize if you can't bridge the gap and you can't figure out the contract. Right. I think the only thing that you can really argue, if you want to play devil's advocate, in my opinion, and argue that the Patriots shouldn't do this, you're arguing that the stats are inflated, right? You're arguing that bad quarterback play, he's feasting on Sam Darnold's of the world, and those are the types of reason you're selling yourself on the fact that he's not actually as good as the statistical production suggests, and that, I don't know if that's necessarily fair to JC. But that's the argument to make.
But I get both arguments. I'm just asking you, if you're in the deal chair here and you're the one who's pulling the strings, what if someone else looks at JC and says that's my number one and is willing to pay up? What's too much to pass up if you're the Patriots when you figure there's tremendous value in what I'm getting back here? What would need to come back for you to say, yeah, I like him, but I gotta make this deal?
First round pick.
Just a first? Because the reason I pointed out, but Bedard, for example, when did a chat the other day, and he said he thinks a first and third is reasonable for JC, and I thought that was extremely
on the
high.
Tag? Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. If they can get that, then I don't hate it, right? I think the question that I always come back to,
or 2 seconds,
right? The question I always come back to, and this is, I think, how listening to guys like Michael Lombardi, for example, lay out how Bill Belichick thinks about these things. You have to think about, if we're going to trade JC Jackson and we're going to get the 40th pick in the draft back, and we're going to use that 40th pick in the draft to draft JC Jackson's replacement, how much worse do we project that player to be, right? How much worse is Kyler Gordon than JC Jackson over the next 2 or 3 seasons? How much worse is Elam from Florida? How much worse is Darian Kendrick from Georgia than JC Jackson for the 2022 and let's say 2022 through 2024?
If a team, think about it, Evan, I know it seems high. If a team believes they're about to get a number one lockdown corner at the beginning of his prime, I don't think that that's a ridiculous, ask there. I think multiple picks, is fair. And I think a first being involved in there is not completely unrealistic either. I think that's the price for that type of talent. The Patriots give up a low first for Brandon Cooks, for example, I know that's several years ago, but you're bringing in an established talent. And obviously I know you have to pay him as well, but the idea is
the difference
the idea is you're dying to pay him. You want to pay him, you want to lock him up.
It's tough because I look at it and I say the best course of action for the Patriots, in my opinion, personally, I would honestly keep JC and draft a corner high, right? Like I would love to see them pair JC Jackson with another guy that can shut it down. If they have a chance to draft Andrew Booth Jr. out of Clemson and pair him with JC Jackson, then I would do that in a heartbeat. Like, I think that would be when you look at Buffalo, you look at Cincinnati, you look at Kansas City, you look at the Chargers, and they're going to probably continue to rise up with Justin Herbert. You look at all these teams around the AFC, you better have coverage talent. Like, you can't just let coverage talent in the AFC East nowadays walk out the door. You just, if you're going to try to compete with Buffalo, you can't let guys that can cover like JC Jackson can leave and walk out the door. It just, you're not going to win that way. And I don't think you're going to win that way drafting and replacing JC Jackson's successor with a 32nd pick in the draft. I just don't feel like that's going to net you enough production to compete. And I think you're taking a massive step backwards.
You will. I mean, that's the whole thing. The argument against trading established talent for draft picks is you're hoping to draft a player as good as the person you just gave away. But the upshot to it is salary flexibility because you're not paying top of market for somebody as they've kind of hit their free agency.
I'm so sick of that, though, because at this point, they have Mac Jones on a rookie contract. So just like all these,
you already have a huge gap there, but you just blew a ton of money on stuff that's borderline useless.
You can move the cap around, right? And you can obviously get out of contracts. Like Nelson Aguilar's contract's gone off the books next year. So
I think they're gonna cut Jonnu too. I think
they'd have to eat a lot of dead cap if they cut Jonnu.
But if they cut him after June 1, I think it's only $10 million.
They can make something happen with Jonnu potentially. The point I'm making with the cap is that I think that we have been sold, and this is the one thing, and I don't listen to his show all the time, but the one thing I agree with Michael Felger on is that the Patriots have sold us a bag of goods about the salary cap being so strict.
Of course. I believe in Felger's cap is crap, mentality.
I don't think it's crap. I think it's very easily.
It can be easily
manipulated.
Yes.
Very easily. And especially when you have the quarterback on a rookie deal, if the Patriots' excuse for not paying JC Jackson is they don't have the cap to do it, that is absolutely bonkers. That is as far from the truth as it could possibly be. So this boils down to if they see the value in the player lining up with the contract and they don't want to overpay the player. But if you're going to overpay Jonnu Smith and you're going to overpay Nelson Aguilar and you're going to overpay some of these other guys that you did in free agency last year and then not overpay JC Jackson a little bit to keep him here, then I think that you're talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Yeah.
That is a tough one to swallow.
Again, the end of the day comes down to whether the Patriots believe Jackson is truly a number one, in which case I believe they'll pay him, or whether they believe that he needs to get paid like a one, but he's not a one, in which case I think they look to move him. And because we don't know how they view it, that's where it's gonna be difficult to kind of predict how this goes. I do not believe, based on everything Bill Belichick does, that he's going to look at his roster and say, if I lose a corner, I'm going to be in trouble. I think he's just going to figure it out. And if that's that, he's making a business decision, irrespective of his team needs at this time, because that's what it comes down to is I know I need it, but I'm not putting myself in a hole and I'm not paying for something I don't think is worth the money. And he'll absolutely do that. We've seen that over time. He will not be held hostage by team needs, right or wrong.
This isn't peak Tom Brady years. This is not the dynasty Patriots.
I don't agree with the philosophy.
Operating like that is we can't do that anymore until Mac Jones hopefully ascends to MVP caliber quarterback levels, right, where he can carry the team on his back. If they have some talent deficiencies in certain position groups in certain areas, they can't operate like that, especially in the secondary and the type of scheme that they want to play. Because like I said, Buffalo, Kansas City, Cincinnati, these teams in the AFC that they're going to have to get through in the playoffs, if you don't have the back end, second, and the talent in the back end to compete and be able to cover all the options that these teams have, you're not winning a Super Bowl anytime soon.
Yep. No, I don't disagree there. And I don't think you have the luxury of kind of operating the way you did with all of those years because, Tom Brady was the ultimate fail-safe, of course.